Sex in ancient Egypt was far more than a private act. It was intertwined with religion, social order, family, and survival. Egyptians viewed sexuality as a natural and essential part of life, a force that connected humans to the divine. From the moment of birth, boys and girls were taught that life, reproduction, and pleasure were all part of the cosmic balance, known as Ma'at. Marriage was central, but it was flexible. Most Egyptians married for love, for status, or for practical reasons, securing alliances, property, or inheritance. Polygamy existed among the wealthy and royalty, but ordinary people usually had one spouse. Love poems, letters, and songs from the era show that passion and desire were celebrated openly, not hidden in shame. Sexual health and fertility were closely linked to religion. Gods and goddesses were often invoked for protection, fertility, and safe childbirth. Hathor, the goddess of love and pleasure, oversaw desire and sexual harmony. Temples sometimes held rituals intended to ensure fertility or bless unions. People believed that sexual activity could maintain health, happiness, and prosperity. Contraception and birth control were surprisingly sophisticated. Ancient Egyptians used natural methods like honey, acacia gum, and pessaries to prevent pregnancy. These methods were known, discussed, and passed through generations. Fertility was valued, but not every sexual encounter was intended to create life. Pleasure and intimacy were considered worthy goals in themselves. Sexuality also had social dimensions. Relationships outside marriage were possible, and while adultery was punished, there were clear rules about what was acceptable. Women had more freedom in choosing partners than in many other ancient societies. Love and desire were not hidden, they were part of poetry, art, and everyday life. Art and literature depict intimacy openly. Erotic scenes appear in tombs, papyri, and paintings. These images were not pornographic by modern standards. They were educational, symbolic, and sometimes humorous. They reinforced the idea that sexuality was normal, natural, and connected to divine life forces. Sexual education began early. Children learned about anatomy, reproduction, and social expectations. Puberty was a time of preparation, guided by family and community. Knowledge was practical, not moralistic. They understood that sexual activity had consequences for health, lineage, and social stability. Even in royal households, sexuality had political importance. Pharaohs' marriages were strategic, ensuring legitimacy, alliances, and divine favor. Love existed, but the primary goal was continuity of the line. Kings married sisters or half-sisters to preserve divine bloodlines, blending politics, religion, and sexual practice. Sexual taboos existed but were limited. Incest outside the royal family was discouraged. Adultery could have legal consequences, but overall, sexual behavior was treated as part of life's balance. Shame and secrecy were minimal compared to later societies. Religion deeply influenced sexual behavior in ancient Egypt. Sexuality was not simply personal, it was connected to creation itself. Gods were often depicted in intimate acts that symbolized fertility and the continuation of life. The union of gods and goddesses mirrored the union of humans. Sexual energy was seen as divine, a creative force that maintained Ma'at, the cosmic balance of order, harmony, and life. Rituals sometimes involved sexuality, particularly in fertility rites. Priests and priestesses performed sacred acts to ensure the prosperity of crops, people, and livestock. Temples of Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and pleasure, often hosted ceremonies to celebrate desire and reproduction. Sex was thus both sacred and practical, intertwined with health, wealth, and survival. Erotic art was widespread and openly depicted in tombs, papyri, and household objects. Scenes ranged from romantic intimacy to humor, showing that Egyptians embraced sexuality as a natural part of life. These depictions were not considered shameful. They were educational, symbolic, and occasionally satirical. The purpose was to celebrate fertility, love, and human experience, while also reinforcing the social and spiritual order. Daily life reflected this understanding. Couples shared affection. Children were raised in families where intimacy was normalized, and marriage included both love and practical considerations. Sex was a bond between partners, a source of pleasure, and a duty to family and society. Women had significant agency, particularly in choosing partners and managing household life. Their role in reproduction and domestic authority was respected and protected by law and custom. Medical knowledge in Egypt also intersected with sex. Gynecological and obstetric texts show sophisticated understanding of female anatomy, fertility, and childbirth. Contraception was known and practiced, using natural materials to prevent pregnancy when desired. Herbal remedies and spells were employed to ensure fertility, prevent miscarriage, and protect sexual health. Knowledge of these methods was widespread, indicating that Egyptians approached sexuality pragmatically as part of life's balance. Royal sexuality carried political significance. Pharaohs married strategically to maintain divine bloodlines, sometimes marrying sisters or close relatives. These unions ensured legitimacy, strengthened alliances, and reinforced the sacred role of the king. Pleasure and affection could exist, but duty and power guided sexual behavior. The pharaoh's sexual life was a tool of statecraft as much as a personal matter. Infidelity, while punished, was relatively well defined. Laws and social norms discouraged adultery, but they also recognized the realities of human desire. The emphasis was on balance, respect, and the protection of property and lineage. Social harmony depended on regulating sexual behavior, not suppressing it entirely. Even beyond humans, sexuality was reflected in myths, symbols, and stories. Animals were associated with fertility, gods were depicted with creative energy, and sexual imagery was embedded in everyday objects. Egyptians recognized the universality of desire and its connection to survival and creation. Ultimately, the sexual life of ancient Egyptians was inseparable from culture, religion, and survival. Pleasure, love, fertility, and spirituality were entwined. Sex was a force of life, a duty, and a divine expression. To understand it is to understand the rhythm of daily existence, the priorities of society, and the values that guided one of the world's oldest civilizations. Ancient Egyptians did not see sex as shameful or hidden. It was essential, celebrated, and revered. From ordinary households to royal palaces, from daily life to sacred ritual, sexuality was a force that shaped identity, power, and eternity. It was a human act, a divine act, and a practical act, all at once. In the end, The ancient Egyptian approach to sex reminds us that life, pleasure, and survival were deeply interconnected. Nothing in their worldview separated desire from duty, love from duty, or pleasure from the sacred. Sex was life itself, and life was sacred.